Welcome to the 9th presentation in the 2022 Doctoral Student Support Webinar Series. Tonight we welcome a very special guest, Dr. Jen Robinson, who is joining us from her vacation in Ireland. Dr. Robinson is currently a lead faculty with the Academic Engagement Center at the University of Arizona Global Campus, and she works both with first-year students, just at the very beginning of their program, and doctoral students, working as a committee member and also leading doctoral in residencies. Jen, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for inviting me here. This is one of the best things I get to do, is to be in a room with people, whether we're on video or we're face-to-face, and that we have such technology that I can still be a part of what you're doing from on the other side of the world. I appreciate that. I currently am in Europe because my husband is deployed over here with the Department of Defense, working with the Ministry of Defense. So they will be kicking us out in a year. So I get to lead this really fun life from across the pond, which is why it is midnight where I am. But the information I am going to present to you today, I hope, even if it's not a full system you can take away with you, that there are bits and pieces that are going to make your life so much easier. And I have this wonderful privilege of working with first-year students and towards the last year students. And I could not be more rewarded when I can help somebody figure out a way to master or wrangle or rope in the just incredible amounts of information that you will be using and researching and organizing over the next few years. So my objective in the next few minutes is sort of twofold. One is to get you thinking about your current note-taking system. If you do not have a solid note-taking system, that is just fine. My goal is to pull you to the dark side of systematic note-taking. And then maybe think about how you can make changes to how you take notes and organize information to maximize your time. My guess is that your parents, your spouses, you are coaches, you're on the PTO, you're running people here and there, or you're part of the sandwich generation where you're taking care of parents and kids. And so the more we can do to maximize our time, the better, the more successful we will be and create that important persistence that is needed to finish this program. When I went through my doctoral program, it was face-to-face, but I had 3 young children. My youngest was 1 when I started. So I had a 1-year-old, a 3-year-old, and then an 8-year-old. We're sort of this weird age-gapped family. And I remember what a struggle it was to process everything that was going on in my life. So I want you to think about, when you read, how do you process the information you're reading? Do you have to go back and reread paragraphs multiple times? There's no shame in that. I do as well. Especially when we're absolutely knackered at the end of the day, and trying to read one more thing or do one more thing just feels really overwhelming. And then after you read, what do you do with that information when you process it? And does your note-taking system help you with the analysis you need to do from the just sheer amounts of information that you digest? When I would do reading, it was typically in the evening at the end of the day. Kids have been put to bed. I have a moment to read an article, or it was on a Saturday when I could get up before everybody else, and start reading and taking notes. The problem was, on Saturday, if I read 2 or 3 articles, sometimes I could not get back to it again until Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, because of life. And then if I had to recall what I read the few days before, it sometimes was just a jumble in my brain. It would be very difficult to recall, to decide what concept it went with. Was this for my framework? Was this for chapter 3? What exactly did I want to use this information for? And so I want you to think about those same things and think about your note-taking system, how you maximize your time, and how you can use your note-taking system not just as a way to free up your working memory to generate more ideas, but as a way to really dive into that analysis and synthesis that you need to do. So we're going to follow the journey of a couple of students as a way to situate this process. And we're going to start with Andy first. Andy is this really cool person who runs a large community college network. Super busy, super just on the go constantly. And would read an article, highlight, annotate, and then put it down. Go to the next article, read the article, highlight, annotate, put it down. And then anytime Andy wants to recall something, he has to dive through those multiple articles to figure out, okay, which article was that? Wait, okay, was that in the literature review that they did for another article? Or wait, was that part of their conclusion? So can you just already imagine the amount of time it's taking for Andy to have to recall everything that's been read and then to dig through all of those sources again? Now, I don't know about you. I'm in the process of writing a book about my research, and I just finished one chapter, and it had about 27 references. That was for 50 pages. Now imagine the full dissertation and the number of references that you have needing to file back through 20, 30, 40, 50 different articles to find that specific thing is going to be very challenging. Likewise, even if you're taking notes and annotating, flipping back through the pages can sometimes feel a little overwhelming. Where was that one term I needed, that one acronym? I do not quite remember where I put that in my notes. On the other hand, we have Joyce. Joyce is someone who, and Andy did not start really reading and taking notes for his research until he started the dissertation writing process, that pre-proposal process where you're getting together the problem statement and the purpose statement and all those great things. Joyce, on the other hand, I in the chat, some of you were talking about how you were just starting out, and I was so glad to see that, because what Joyce did was something a little different, where she started a program and after a few classes decided, okay, I know what my research, the trajectory of where I'm going. She started reading an article every week, sometimes 2 articles a week, and she did that for a full year and a half before she ever hit dissertation writing. Now think about your own memory and the number of things you have going on. Could you remember what you read a year to a year and a half earlier? Someone was asking me the other day about a C.S. Lewis, because we're up here in Ireland, a C.S. Lewis book that I had read in 9th grade. And I said, yes, I remember what the cover looked like, but I can't remember everything about it. But Joyce had a different way of taking notes. And by the time she got to her proposal writing and getting those first chapters done, she was able to write her first 3 chapters in 27 weeks, which at our university is 3 sessions of 9 weeks, because she had just this system. She was already using this system as I'm about to show you. And she was using it as a way to analyze, so she could very easily look at something and go, oh yeah, I have this, and this, start writing, and then be able to go back and start filling in some of the gaps that she was unaware of when she first started. I want you to think about who you most relate to. Is it Andy, who reads and annotates, but just kind of sets it and keeps that pile going of the reading and annotating? Or is it Joyce? Do you read and annotate, but then take that next step to move that information into something else that's going to make it easier to process? So Joyce uses something called a synthesis matrix. And this is really what I'm going to emphasize today. It is not the only way to take notes. It is the way I have found to be most successful. And many of my students have found this as a way to become successful as well. Not just my doctoral students, but my first-year students as well. It's a really great way to be able to organize. And so Joyce was already using this, and from this system was able to start right away into writing. And her first chapter, she wrote chapter 1 in 9 weeks. I was floored. So I stopped and I called her and we did a Zoom and I said, this is unreal. Can you tell me what your strategies are? Because I want to share those with every other doctoral student I have. And she said, here's how I do it. I read, I annotate, and I move it over into this Excel spreadsheet. And then every few months I reprint it. And she has a nice binder, and she was able to pull out the binder for chapter 1, the binder for chapter 2, the binder for chapter 3. And I was just floored. She had done all of this work before she ever got to anything related to actually writing her dissertation. She already had a good idea where she was heading. So think about who you relate to the most in your system right now. Do you struggle to remember what you read? Our working memory can only hold so much, so we have to do something with it in order to get it to a place of storage, or we have to have an external storage system. We have to have the thumb drive for our brain to be able to store all of that information so that we can come back to it at a later time and retrieve it. You might be in your courses and come across an article or a resource that you think, oh, I'm going to need that on my dissertation, especially when you get to research methods. There's going to be quite a bit you'll want to keep, but your research methods might be in the middle of your program and you still have several more classes to go. So being able to put that information, remove it from the course and put it into some sort of an external holding system for your brain is going to help you when you come back to that. It's going to really help you remember what you wanted to remember. And then Joyce with her solid note-taking system to help with organization so that she could crank out 3 chapters, boom, 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 and then give birth to a baby. So she's taking a couple of months off, but it was just so interesting to see that she and I had very similar ways of taking notes. So like I said, Joyce's system is a synthesis matrix. I'm going to show you more about this as we move through. But the idea is, if you picture an Excel spreadsheet, on the left side, going down the left side, you would put your APA references down that left side. Across the top are going to be your major themes or ideas. So I'm working on research about feedback. So I'm looking at pedagogy and pedagogy and andragogy and Tinto's model and Knowles's adult education model. I mean, there's lots of things. So all of those different things would go across the top. And as I read this one resource, if that resource mentioned something about pedagogy, which is the study of having self-efficacy in higher education, understanding how to structure higher education to work for you. So if that source said something about pedagogy, I would put notes in that first box. If that source said something about andragogy, I would put something in that box in pedagogy and just go down the line. So I could very easily look at this one source and say, okay, this one source hit on these many topics. Likewise, if I want to write about pedagogy, if I'm at that section where I want to write about pedagogy, I can take that long ways column with all of those resources and just sit down and start writing. It's a place to get started. Sometimes just that getting started is the hardest part. If we can just get started, we typically know where we need to go after that. So just think about your concepts or your framework. Even if you're not at that research stage yet, think about in your master's program or whatever program you were in before, and whatever final product you were doing for that program, what were those themes or frameworks that you could have put across the top? And would this type of a system have helped you be able to isolate a topic and then all of the sources that go with it, or to isolate a source and how it meets all of the different components that you're including in your research or your project? This isn't something I just teach. This is something I use. But I'm a very kinesthetic person. I have to be up and moving. And so this is how my brain works. And so I'm showing you the extreme version of this as an example. So if we look across, so this is the synthesis matrix that I'm using right now for a book I'm writing. Across the top, the blue and pink Post-it notes are my different concepts that are all coming together as my framework in this book as a way to explain some of the research I've done. So across the top are all of these different concepts. Now, the index cards going down are notes from individual articles or books or chapters that I read. And then I have a corresponding sheet. It's hard to see it over to the left right now, but there are sort of bunched up Post-it notes. They're pink and green. And those are the APA references. So if I go to pull any of those cards off of the wall, I know exactly the reference it came from. I do not have to dig. I do not have to stress. I do not have to spend an hour combing back through the library trying to use that keyword to find this source again. Those connections become very clear. And so you can see when I talk about those columns are, you can see very distinct columns. But the reason I like to put it up on the wall is because I can move cards around as well. You can see some cards are sort of nestled between columns because they're not quite here, not quite there, but they're a combination of. This is something you can easily do in an Excel spreadsheet as well. I just prefer the very kinesthetic version, the synthesis matrix. So if we just take that snapshot across the top, you can see that those are the main topics. They connect to my research questions because in our research questions, we have those keywords. So we want to make sure that those are up there as well. And then it's the connection to my framework, which has to do with adult education and giving feedback. So just as I was talking about how Joyce was using her synthesis matrix with all of her topics across the top, I'm doing the exact same thing. Then if I were just to take a cross-section of this, we can see that the topic is at the top and then all of those cards, or because sometimes I'm exhausted, I go to the copier and I copy that little piece out of the book because it's such a good piece and it's so holistic that I just sometimes don't have the working memory space to paraphrase it at the moment. So I make a copy of it and I stick it in that column. And this is one way to start getting all of my ducks in a row. Everything just starts falling into place when you have a system like this. So what this looks like, well, before I go to that next slide, one thing that I really like to do with this is when I sit down to write, and one of the reasons I love this kinesthetic version is I'm also a quilter. So if you're a quilter, you know that you lay stuff on the floor, right, to see the patterns. So I take all of those cards off the wall and I sort of lay them out in order of how I want to discuss that research in the chapter or in that section. And then I can sort of bundle it all up, stick it in a little folder, put it on the wall. And then I know, look, it's very tangible evidence that I have been doing something because I have to have that same reward system for myself that I have for my students. Because you will get to a point where you need that reward system for yourself. So being able to pull that off the wall and just sit down and just type it out is really wonderful. Last Sunday, I did this where I pulled one column off the wall and I just sort of laid it out in the order I wanted to cover those topics in that research. And I sat there and 8 hours flew by. If any of you research chicks sent me high and flow, this sort of a system really helps me fall into that flow. And I typed for about 8 hours and did not even come out of the door or realize that 8 hours had gone by. It was so organized and so comprehensive, that column, that I was able to just go. And that ended up being probably about 62 pages. So in your mind, as you're calculating, okay, those notes equal about how many pages? For me, it ended up being about 62 pages, one of those columns, but I did have to go into the library because as you take all of your notes off the wall and you compile them, you see where your gaps are. in that. And that gives you some really solid focus instead of worrying and fretting over, wow, I don't know if I have everything I need. You can sit down and start that organizing, start the typing, and then go, oh, yeah, I need one more thing about this. Hop in the library, grab it, add it in. I make a card for it as well because that's just who I am. So if you're thinking about a system that is going to help you find that flow, where you can fall into it for hours and come out the other end with lots of pages, that's important. One thing that Andy, my first student, would get frustrated about is he would read an article and he'd say, hey, I only got 1 or 2 lines from that article. And I said, that's normal. That's normal. That's why having a system and reading and reading and reading, taking the notes, organizing the notes, then you come back to it. That's where the pages come from. It's the cumulative effort of taking these notes in a systematic way that's going to help you be able to pull all of this off of your metaphorical wall and put it into your paper. I'm just going to stop there a moment. And I'll move into what I show students. This is just a way to get started, where you have your themes across the top, your sources down the side. And I want you to just start thinking about what are the things you want to research, or if you're at that place where you're working on your proposal or defense, or if you happen to have your defense on Monday and you're heading into writing coming up very soon. What is it, or how can you structure your synthesis matrix to work for you? What are your topics? What is your framework? What are your research questions that you can use? Okay, that's a lot of information. So I want you to just think about, what is your current note-taking system? What changes are you thinking about in your system? And how is your current note-taking system working for you? Is it a system that is going to help you fall into that flow for writing? Or is it a system that causes you more frustration, like with Andy? So I'm just doing a little teacher wait time for your brain to process. I'm going to transition into this question and answer part right now, because it's really not, the system's not difficult. It's not rocket science. But it takes that mental effort in the beginning, and the effort at the end will pay off tremendously.
At this point in the live webinar, we turn off the recording and we allow people to ask any question they want about the dissertation process, about the topic at hand, and we do that in an environment where it's not being recorded, so people really feel safe to ask anything that's on their mind. And I really encourage you, if you can make the live webinars, to do that, because this part really is a very magical part of the webinar. But to give you an overview of what we discussed, there was a focus on understanding there is a lot of work that's happening before you even sit down and type those first sentences in whatever paper that you're writing. There's a lot of reading, researching, thinking, organizing, preparing through a synthesis matrix before you even put that proverbial pen to paper. There was also a lot of discussion with people wanting to know when to get started, how to get started, and the sooner the better. Even if you have no idea what your dissertation or doctoral project idea is going to be, that area that you're going to be researching, well, first of all, if you don't have an idea, I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes below, but try it out on a paper that you're writing for any class. Also, you can try it out on different topics that you're exploring so that you can maybe find the one that fits best for you. And you should also be exploring different methods. If you hate Excel, you don't understand Excel, and it gives you anxiety, that's not going to be the way to go. There are other ways, there are other methods to create a synthesis matrix. And the sooner you figure out the one that really works for you, the better. We also discussed some of the other benefits of a synthesis matrix, one being it reduces the likelihood of unintentional plagiarism because as you're creating this piece, you're already synthesizing and analyzing and putting things in your own words. It also gives you a bonus study guide for your oral defense because you will have in one document and with the different columns in the organization, ways to again help you organize your thinking, organize all the things that you've learned as you've created your dissertation or your doctoral project. And it will be so beneficial to have that as at your fingertips as you're preparing for your oral defense. Scholarly writing at the doctoral level is a challenge for many, if not most, doctoral students. So be sure to join us next month on October 19th at 4 p.m. Pacific time when we have another special guest, Louis Sintani, who's going to demystify the pressures of doctoral writing and tell you how you can sound scholarly without even trying. You will not want to miss this webinar. And if you don't already follow us on social media, be sure to do that so you can be notified of other events like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next month.